I was in Salt Lake City the past 2 days, and I'm thinking about the way that the people that settled that area, the Mormons, came there, what made them choose it. Right now it's about 100 degrees in Salt Lake City, so it's unpleasantly warm, but I think Salt Lake City is mostly known for being cold and snowy. At least that's the way I always thought of it. And the city itself is flat, but of course, the surrounding area is very mountainous. And it makes me think about why people live where they do, why they settled where they did. I mean, today you can go live in Salt Lake City and it's no big deal. It's got its temporal quirks, but so does every place. But when there was nothing there except for mountains, the people who settled it really had to decide something. It's like, okay, is this where we're going to stop? And I mean, there are a lot of places in this country that it's kind of like, why did people decide to live here? I mean, the Dakotas, Minnesota. I mean, quite frankly, anywhere that's cold in the wintertime. Just the challenges that brought. I mean, I'm sure there were positive aspects too. Maybe a lot of wildlife and game for hunting. But, people really survived some treacherous conditions to settle this country. It's pretty amazing. And it just makes you question, like, why did they stop where they stopped? And then with respect to the Mormons specifically, I had a really interesting philosophical discussion with a colleague that I was there with. He's religious. He's Christian. And we were just talking about different religions, but the Mormons really went all across the country. I mean, they started in upstate New York. They were kicked out of 3 or 4 different places where they had settled. Finally, ended up in Salt Lake. But the interesting thing is that Joseph Smith, who was the founder, the prophet of the Mormons, I don't know how he was received when he first started preaching his message, but probably as a lunatic. That's really how most prophets were received. Muhammad, Jesus, they were saying things that were not popular in the day, that were not perceived wisdom. I heard stories that, Muhammad was subject to assassination attempts. People just tried to kill him because they didn't like what he had to say. So these people had to survive all of this adversity just to keep their message alive. And then through that, somehow people decided to listen, which is also amazing because Joseph Smith, at the time that he was doing what he did, probably was not the only person doing it. There probably were other people who had messages that they thought were important that they were preaching, and they just didn't win out the way Joseph Smith's did. They didn't start a new religion that still exists today. There was something about what Joseph Smith did, and I suppose if you believe in that faith, if you are religious, then you'll say, well, his path won out because he was backed by God. His was the word of God. But if you take that piece out of it, there had to be something about what he was saying that appealed to enough people that they would follow him. And I'm far from an expert on the Book of Mormon. I know next to nothing about it. Some things that I have heard, are different from other religions, and could make it hard to believe, but enough people believed it that he was able to kind of gather a society around him, and a very loyal one at that. These people followed him all across the country. I mean, they were persecuted. They were probably killed, chased out. I mean, it was not easy. Life back then wasn't easy. And for these people, it was even less easy. And so by the time they got to Salt Lake, the people who were still with him, those were some really loyal people because of everything they had been through. So it's no wonder that Salt Lake flourished and survives to this day, because by the time they got there, those people had been through so much. They were like the toughest people around. There was nothing that was going to stop them. But it's just fascinating how certain stories, certain messages win out, and those become the ones that we know of. But there were other people who I'm sure saw messages from God, or thought they did, right around the same time that Joseph Smith did, and they probably tried to preach what they saw, and we don't know about those people. We know about Joseph Smith. There's an entire city dedicated to his memory. There are universities that honor what he started. Mormons they're in the government. They have a lot of wealth. They're an extremely successful society. So what he started in the woods in upstate New York endures to this day in a really kind of an amazing way. And I think it's interesting. You don't have to agree with it. You don't have to believe it. But I think it's worth respecting. And I think it's interesting to try to understand.